The morning air in Manhattan carried a sharp chill as Keanu Reeves stepped out of the black SUV and onto the wide stone steps of the New York courthouse. The building rose above him, imposing and timeless, its columns carved with the weight of decades of justice. This was supposed to be a routine appearance, quiet, procedural, almost invisible. Keanu had agreed to testify as a character witness in a minor case connected to a former associate. No drama, no headlines. At least, that was the plan. He adjusted his coat, nodded politely to a passing court officer, and entered the building. Inside, the courthouse buzzed with its usual controlled chaos, lawyers whispering into phones, defendants sitting stiffly beside their attorneys, the echo of footsteps bouncing off marble floors. No one noticed him at first. In New York, even celebrities blended into the background of urgency and motion. Until they didn't. As Keanu passed through the security checkpoint, a subtle shift rippled through the room. Two officers exchanged a look. One touched the radio at his shoulder. A third stepped forward, blocking Keanu's path with practiced calm. "Mr. Reeves," the officer said evenly, "we need you to come with us." Keanu paused. "Is there a problem?" The officer didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gestured to two others who moved in with quiet precision. People nearby slowed, sensing something unusual. A lawyer stopped mid-sentence. A clerk looked up from her desk. "Sir," the officer repeated, lower this time, "you're being detained." The word landed harder than a shout. "Detained?" Keanu asked, genuinely confused. "On what grounds?" That was when the cuffs came out. Metal glinted under the courthouse lights as the officer stepped closer. Gasps rippled outward. Someone raised a phone. Another whispered his name in disbelief. The sound of the handcuffs closing echoed far louder than it should have in the vast hall. Keanu did not resist. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked round, taking in the faces, some shocked, some curious, some already calculating the value of the moment unfolding before them. The entrance caught sight of the scene and froze, eyes widening before instinct kicked in and the camera came up. "Is that—" "Yes," someone breathed. "That's Keanu Reeves." The officers escorted him down the corridor, past framed portraits of judges and plaques engraved with promises of justice and order. Cameras flashed now. The calm efficiency of the arrest only made it more disturbing. There was no spectacle, just certainty. And that certainty spread faster than fear. Outside, news alerts began to buzz. Inside, court proceedings stalled as word raced ahead of him. By the time Keanu disappeared through a secured door, the question was already echoing far beyond the courthouse walls. How does someone walk into a New York court as a witness and leave it under arrest? The corridor outside the security area was never meant for moments like this. It was a functional passageway, wide, polished, and designed to move people efficiently from one courtroom to another. Yet, as Keanu Reeves was guided into it, the hallway transformed into a tunnel of attention. Word had traveled fast. A pair of reporters who had been waiting for an unrelated hearing spotted the small group of officers first. Recognition flashed across their faces, followed by disbelief. Cameras came up almost instinctively. The sound of shutters firing filled the corridor, sharp and relentless, cutting through the usual courthouse hush. "Keanu, Mr. Keeves," someone called out. He didn't turn his head. The officers moved with disciplined speed. positioning themselves just enough to shield him without fully blocking the view. It was clear they weren't trying to hide him, only to maintain control. That detail alone fueled speculation. This wasn't a misunderstanding they hoped would disappear. This was something they expected to withstand daylight. Keanu's hands were cuffed in front of him now, resting calmly against his coat. His expression remained composed, almost distant, as if he were observing the moment from somewhere just behind his own eyes. For those watching, that calm was unsettling. People expected denial, anger, confusion. Instead, they saw restraint. More phones appeared. Clerks leaned out from behind counters. Lawyers paused, mid-stride, briefcases hanging forgotten at their sides. Even court officers, trained to remain detached, couldn't fully hide their curiosity. "Is this real?" someone whispered. Security cameras mounted along the ceiling tracked every step. Later, those angles would be replayed, endlessly slowed down, analyzed, cropped into thumbnails and headlines. But in the moment, all anyone could feel was the strange collision of celebrity and law, happening far too close to ignore. As the group reached the center of the hallway, an officer raised a hand. "Clear the path," he ordered. A reporter tried to step closer, microphone extended. "Mr. Reeves, can you comment on the charges?" No answer. Keanu kept walking, eyes forward, shoulders relaxed. The quiet dignity of his silence contrasted sharply with the chaos forming around him. It was as if he understood something. No one else did that. Speaking now would only feed the noise. Keanu turned his head not toward the cameras, but toward a nearby security lens, mounted high in the corner. His gaze held there for a second, steady and searching, as if he were already aware that the real record of this moment wasn't being made by the press. Then he stepped inside. The doors closed, sealing him away from the noise. But it was too late. The footage was already spreading, racing ahead of him, across networks and timelines. Inside the elevator, the hum of machinery replaced the chaos outside. Keanu exhaled slowly. Above them, screens across the courthouse flickered as news alerts appeared.
The effect of the arrest reached the courtrooms before any official explanation did. In courtroom 1-B, proceedings were underway when a bailiff leaned toward the judge and whispered urgently. The judge's pen paused mid-sentence. His expression tightened not with anger but with calculation. He nodded once. "Court will stand in recess," he announced, the gavel striking sharply. "Remain seated." Confusion spread instantly. Attorneys exchanged looks. Jurors shifted in their chairs. A defendant turned toward his lawyer, whispering a question that went unanswered. No reason was given, and that silence was louder than any explanation. Down the hall, another courtroom emptied partially as clerks hurried out. Documents clutched tightly against their chests. Phones buzzed in pockets despite courthouse rules. Screens lit up under tables. One word appeared again and again: Reeves. Judges conferred behind closed doors. Senior court administrators moved quickly. Their calm professionalism strained at the edges. This wasn't just a celebrity issue, it was a procedural shock. Arrests inside a courthouse were rare. Arrests of someone scheduled to appear as a witness were almost unheard of. And arrests this public, they threatened the court's authority. Inside a sealed conference room, officials reviewed what little information they had: a federal hold, a sealed matter, jurisdictional flags. The details were deliberately vague, but the implications were not. "If this leaks improperly," one administrator said, "we lose control of the narrative entirely." "We already have," another replied quietly. Back in the public gallery, spectators sensed the disruption. Reporters slipped in where they could, notebooks already filling with half-confirmed details. A legal analyst whispered to a producer, outlining possible scenarios: cybercrime, financial fraud, federal jurisdiction, each theory more explosive than the last. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had doubled. News vans lined the street, satellite dishes raised like mechanical flowers, live broadcasts cut between anchors, and shaky footage from inside the hallway. The phrase "arrested inside a New York courtroom" echoed again and again, its rarity magnifying its power. Inside Courtroom 1-B, the judge returned briefly. "Due to unforeseen circumstances," he said carefully, "all matters are adjourned until further notice." The gavel struck again. This time, it sounded final. As people filed out, the questions grew sharper. If Keanu Reeves had been the target, why here? Why now? Why in the middle of active court proceedings? Whatever the reason, it had been important enough to interrupt justice itself. In a secured area elsewhere in the building, Keanu waited, unaware of exactly how much momentum his arrest had already created. He could feel it, though. The subtle shift in how officers spoke. The urgency beneath their restraint. The sense that something larger than him.
Keanu was escorted into a secured holding area deep within the courthouse. Far from the noise. Far from the cameras. The room was stark and deliberately neutral, designed to give nothing away. A metal table, 3 chairs, a muted American flag mounted on the wall. No windows. No clocks. 2 federal officials entered a few minutes later, both carrying slim folders marked with red seals. Their demeanor was formal but restrained, as if even they understood the gravity of what was unfolding. "Mr. Reeves," the taller one began, taking a seat across from him, "you are being detained in connection with a sealed federal investigation." Keanu nodded once. "Into what?" The second official opened his folder and slid a document across the table, not for Keanu to read, but for him to see the title: Unauthorized Judicial Access and Digital Authorization Fraud. This case involves manipulation of court-linked digital systems, the official said. Specifically, biometric and identity-based authorizations connected to sealed filings, evidence access, and judicial scheduling. Keanu frowned. "I don't have access to any of that." "That's what we need to determine," the taller official replied. A tablet was placed on the table. With a tap, a timeline appeared: date, times, access logs. Each entry showed a successful authorization. Each was verified by facial recognition, voice confirmation, and behavioral markers, verified by him. These authorizations were used to access sealed court documents, the official continued, some of which were later altered, delayed, or quietly dismissed. Keanu leaned forward. "You're saying I tampered with court records?" "We're saying your identity," did the official corrected. The distinction mattered, but only barely. They showed him still images, captured by courthouse cameras, at other locations. On other dates. A man, with his face, his posture, his walk. Audio clips, followed short confirmations. A voice indistinguishable from his own. Keanu felt a tightness in his chest. Not panic, recognition. "That's not me," he said firmly. "And if you believe it is, then someone has gone to great lengths to make it look that way." The officials exchanged a glance. Admitted. Inside the courthouse, surrounded by independent witnesses. "We needed a real-world confirmation point. A control," Keanu said. "Yes." Keanu continued slowly. "Then it can do it to anyone: judges, attorneys, defendants." The second official closed his folder. "Until we determine how your biometric identity was used, you will remain in federal custody." Keanu nodded, his expression steady. "Then you should hurry," he said. Because if someone can rewrite justice using my face, they won't stop with me. As the officials stood to leave, the weight of the allegation settled fully into the room. This wasn't about celebrity scandal. It was about the idea that justice itself could be accessed, altered, and approved by a face the system had been trained to trust without question.
The news broke before the courthouse doors had even reopened. A single clip, grainy, unsteady, unmistakable, hit social media first. Keanu Reeves in handcuffs, marble walls, federal officers. No context, no explanation. Within minutes, it was everywhere. Phones buzzed across New York City, then across the country, then across the world. By midday, the sidewalk outside the courthouse was unrecognizable. Barricades went up as crowds poured in, drawn by shock and disbelief. Fans stood shoulder to shoulder with legal analysts, tourists with cameras beside activists holding handmade signs. News vans lined the street, satellite dishes angled skyward. Reporters, speaking rapidly into microphones as producers shouted updates through earpieces. "This doesn't make sense," a woman said into a camera, her voice shaking. "He's not that kind of person." Others were less certain. Commentators filled the airwaves with speculation, carefully framing opinions as questions. If the arrest happened inside a courthouse, if federal officials were involved, if the evidence was biometric, the word evidence carried unusual weight. In a world trained to trust data, many were already bracing themselves for the possibility that proof would speak louder than reputation. Online, the divide grew sharper by the minute. Support flooded in first. Clips of Keanu's past interviews resurfaced his quiet humility, his reluctance to seek attention, his reputation for kindness. Hashtags trended worldwide defending him, insisting this was a mistake or a setup. Then came the countercurrent. Fame doesn't mean innocence. Everyone has secrets. Let the system work. The same technology that spread support also amplified doubt. Legal experts appeared on live panels, reminding audiences that an arrest inside a courthouse suggested sealed warrants and high-level authorization. Cybersecurity specialists explained, cautiously, how biometric systems worked and how convincing they could be when they failed. "Your face isn't just an identifier anymore," one analyst said on air. "It's a credential." That sentence echoed everywhere. In some cases, spoke louder than outrage. In reaction was quieter but no less intense, people staring at screens, reevaluating assumptions they didn't realize they'd made. Inside the courthouse, officials watched the coverage with growing concern. The case had escaped containment. Whatever this was meant to be, a controlled detention, a procedural necessity, it had become a public reckoning. And somewhere in a secured holding area, cut off from the noise but aware of its force, Keanu sat alone. He understood something the crowd didn't yet. Public opinion was already on trial, and no matter how this ended, the world would not return to believing that truth was simple, or that systems built on recognition were immune to deception. The reaction outside wasn't just about him anymore. Late afternoon light filtered weakly through the narrow windows of the Federal Review Office as analysts began pulling records at unprecedented speed. What had started as a confident case now sat under a microscope, examined by teams who understood that even a single inconsistency could collapse everything. And inconsistencies were appearing everywhere. At first, they were subtle. A timestamp off by seconds. A location ping that seemed slightly delayed. Individually, each anomaly could be explained away as system lag or routine error. But when layered together, a pattern began to emerge, one that made seasoned investigators uneasy. Keanu's travel records were reviewed first. Flight manifests, hotel logs, vehicle GPS data, each placed him clearly in Los Angeles during one of the alleged courthouse access events. Public footage confirmed it. He had been attending a filmed charity appearance. Broadcast live and archived across multiple platforms, yet the system insisted otherwise. According to biometric logs, his face had authorized access to sealed judicial files in New York at the exact same moment. To realities, one identity, "This can't be coincidence," one analyst muttered, scrolling rapidly through overlapping timelines. They expanded the search. More events surfaced. Authorizations tied to Keanu's biometric profile appeared during dates when he had been photographed, interviewed, and live-streamed thousands of miles away. The data insisted he was into places at once, and disturbingly, it reconciled itself automatically. The system smoothed over contradictions, adjusting secondary records to preserve consistency. That behavior wasn't accidental. "This system is designed to trust first," another analyst said quietly. "Correction comes later if ever." As they dug deeper, they discovered the most alarming detail yet. The authorizations weren't random. They were precise, targeted, and strategically timed to influence court outcomes, accessing documents shortly before key hearings, delaying filings by minutes that mattered, rerouting notifications just long enough to alter decisions. Existed. Keanu's identity had been elevated silently, flagged as high trust, low risk. A digital master key. Inside his holding area, Keanu was brought limited updates. He listened carefully as an official explained the contradictions now spreading across the case. "So the data agrees with itself," Keanu said, "but not with reality." Succeed convincingly. By evening, a quiet consensus formed among investigators. The evidence against Keanu wasn't just weak, it was impossible. An impossibility, when backed by flawless data, pointed to something far more dangerous than human error. It pointed to a system that could be taught to lie and do it beautifully. As night fell over New York, the case against Keanu Reeves began to collapse under its own perfection, but in its place rose a far more troubling question. By nightfall, the investigation had moved beyond the question of whether the evidence was flawed. The only question left was how deeply the flaw went. A secure operations room was activated on an upper floor of the courthouse, far from public access. Screens lined the walls, each displaying different layers of the judicial digital ecosystem: case management software, biometric authorization logs, network permissions, and historical audit trails. The room hummed with quiet urgency. This was no longer about Keanu Reeves alone. Specialists began tracing the authorization pathways backward. Instead of asking who used Keanu's identity, they asked a more dangerous question: who taught the system to trust it absolutely? The answer emerged slowly, reluctantly. Months earlier, a temporary efficiency upgrade had been introduced to reduce delays in high-volume courts. It elevated biometric confirmation as the fastest approval method for accessing sealed materials, overriding older, slower multi-step verifications. On paper, it looked harmless, beneficial even. In practice, it created a silent hierarchy. Certain biometric profiles, judges, senior officials, and a handful of high-recognition public figures were assigned elevated trust scores. The justification was simple. These identities were easy to verify and unlikely to be questioned. Their data was abundant, clean, and consistent. Consistent. A cybersecurity architect stared at the screen. "Someone didn't break in," he said quietly. "They rewired the front door." The manipulation wasn't written in malicious code. It lived in permissions, exceptions, and automated conflict resolution rules. When contradictions appeared, the system didn't flag them, it resolved them. Reality was treated as the error, and someone had been watching. Hidden audit logs revealed that whenever anomalies involving Keanu's identity surfaced, review alerts were silently downgraded. Not erased, just delayed. Long enough for decisions to pass, records to settle, outcomes to become official. That requires internal access, a federal investigator said, and confidence. They ran the same analysis on other identities. The results were chilling. There were judges whose biometric signatures had authorized. "Yes," the official replied. "And someone exploited that." Keanu looked down at his hands, uncuffed now, resting freely on the table. "Then this isn't about fame," he said. "It's about convenience." The official didn't argue, because convenience, Keanu understood, was how dangerous systems were always. Justified, faster, cleaner, more efficient. until no one remembered what had been sacrificed to achieve it. As the investigation widened, one truth became unavoidable. The manipulation had been invisible by design, and if Keanu Reeves hadn't been arrested in public inside a courthouse, surrounded by uncontrolled witnesses, the system would have continued quietly, correcting reality to fit its version of truth. The breakthrough didn't come from the screens. It came from a knock on the door, just after midnight, as analysts combed through layers of permissions and legacy code. A courthouse administrator requested a private audience with the federal oversight team. Her name was Eleanor Grant, a senior IT compliance officer who had worked within the judicial system for nearly 15 years. She wasn't panicked. She wasn't dramatic. She was resolved. In a small conference room away from the operations floor, Eleanor placed a flash drive on the table. Her hands were steady, but her voice carried the weight of a long internal struggle. "I didn't create the vulnerability," she said, "but I recognized it, and I was told not to document it." The room went silent. Eleanor explained that months earlier, she had flagged irregularities in biometric override behavior. Audit trails were closing themselves. Alerts were being rerouted under the label of optimization noise. When she escalated the issue, she was advised politely to let it go. "They said it was above my clearance," she continued, "that the system was behaving as intended." She tapped the flash drive. It wasn't. The data she provided filled in what the analysts couldn't see from the outside. Internal emails, change approvals signed digitally but never reviewed by human oversight. A small cluster of system architects who had quietly expanded biometric trust parameters without informing judicial leadership. Most damning of all was a permissions map showing who had the authority to downgrade alerts. Only a handful of people. All of them knew exactly what they were doing, Eleanor said, because they designed it so no single change looked criminal. It only became dangerous when everything worked together. When asked why she came forward now, Eleanor didn't hesitate. "Because tonight, I watched a system I was supposed to protect almost destroy an innocent man," she said, "and I realized silence made me complicit." Her testimony shifted the tone of the investigation immediately. What had been framed as a technological failure was now unmistakably human. Decisions had been made, warnings had been ignored, and convenience had been chosen over accountability. Authorization overrides. Names were quietly removed from systems. A chain of trust began collapsing from the inside. Keanu was informed shortly after. "They have someone on record," an official told him. "Someone credible." Keanu closed his eyes briefly, not in relief, but in recognition. "It always takes someone from inside," he said. "Systems don't confess. People do." As dawn approached, Eleanor's statement was sealed, her identity protected under whistleblower statutes. She left the courthouse through a side entrance, unnoticed by the cameras outside. But the impact of her decision was already irreversible. For the first time since the arrest, the investigation had a human spine, someone willing to say this was wrong and mean it. By sunrise, the tone inside the courthouse had shifted from tension to urgency. What Eleanor Grant had provided could no longer be contained within internal reviews or quiet corrections. Her testimony connected the technical manipulation to human intent, and that changed the legal posture of the entire case. What had begun as an arrest now threatened to become one of the most significant judicial integrity scandals in decades. A closed emergency hearing was convened in a secured courtroom, attended only by senior judges, federal oversight officials, and legal representatives cleared for sealed matters. Phones were surrendered, recording devices disabled. The room carried the heavy stillness of decisions that could not be undone. The presiding judge spoke first. "We are no longer examining an individual," she said. "We are examining the reliability of this court." That sentence redefined everything. Evidence logs were presented again, this time with Eleanor's internal records. Layered over them, where the system once appeared flawless, fractures were now unmistakable. Authorization hierarchies had been deliberately altered. Oversight safeguards had been selectively weakened. and biometric confirmations had been elevated beyond their lawful authority. This court cannot proceed on evidence that cannot be trusted, the judge ruled. The order was immediate and decisive. All actions tied to the compromised biometric authorizations were suspended. Sealed cases potentially affected by the system were flagged for independent review. And most critically, the federal hold on Keanu Reeves was formally lifted. In a secured chamber nearby, Keanu was informed of the decision. "You are no longer under arrest," the official said. Effective immediately. Keanu absorbed the words quietly. No visible relief. No celebration, just a slow, steady nod. "And the record?" he asked. "The court will issue a statement acknowledging systemic failure," the official replied. "Your involvement will be formally reclassified as a verification anomaly." Keanu exhaled. "Make sure it's clear," he said. "This shouldn't follow anyone else." A single phrase rippled through the crowd like electricity. Charges dropped. Recalibrate narratives that had hardened overnight. Inside the courthouse, judges continued working through the implications. Every decision made under the compromised system now carried a question mark. Appeals would come. Investigations would expand. Trust, once assumed, would have to be rebuilt piece by piece. Keanu was escorted through a private exit, shielded from the chaos. As he stepped into the early morning light, he paused briefly, not for the cameras, but for himself. For everyone still inside those walls. Justice had not failed because of malice alone. It had failed because it trusted efficiency more than verification, recognition more than reality. And now, having been exposed in full view of the world, the system could no longer pretend that was enough. The statement was released just after noon. It was short, precise, and unprecedented. The New York Unified Court System acknowledged a systemic failure in biometric authorization protocols, confirmed that Keanu Reeves had been wrongfully detained, and announced an immediate suspension of biometric-only access across all connected judicial platforms. The language was legal, restrained, but the meaning was unmistakable. The system had been wrong. Across news networks, the narrative shifted sharply. Headlines changed from "actor arrested in court" to "court admits critical digital failure." Legal analysts spoke with rare caution, emphasizing that this was not a celebrity scandal. It was a constitutional concern. How many rulings relied on these systems? How many decisions were influenced without anyone knowing? Those questions echoed louder than the arrest ever had. Independent review panels were formed within days. Judges recused themselves from cases flagged by the audit. Appeals were prepared. Careers quietly ended. Others were just beginning to unravel. Eleanor Grant's testimony, though sealed, became the backbone of a sweeping reform effort. Whistleblower protections were strengthened overnight. Digital authorization now required human verification at multiple levels. For the first time, courts admitted publicly that automation had moved faster than accountability. Keanu remained mostly silent. When he did speak, it wasn't on the courthouse steps or behind a podium. He released a brief written message, shared without promotion. "I was cleared because the truth surfaced in time. Justice should never depend on recognition alone. Systems must question themselves as much as they question people." The message spread quickly, not because it was sensational, but because it was unsettling. In law schools, the case was already being studied. In tech circles, it was debated fiercely. In public conversations, a quiet unease settled in. People began to realize how often they trusted systems simply because they worked smoothly. Weeks later, the courthouse returned to routine. The marble floors shined. The halls echoed with footsteps again. But something invisible had changed. Biometric scanners now paused before approving anything. Warning prompts appeared where none had existed. Human eyes were required where machines once decided alone. Trust had slowed down, and that was the point. For Keanu, life resumed but not unchanged. He moved through the world with the same humility as before, but with a deeper awareness of how easily certainty could be manufactured. Fame had not protected him. It had nearly erased him. The arrest in a New York courtroom would fade from headlines eventually, but its impact would not. because the case left behind a truth that could not be undone.